Hi, I'm Maeva, and this is Raising with the Village, a podcast where parents share their real stories so none of us have to feel like we're navigating parenthood alone. In today's episode, we speak with Sarah. Her journey into motherhood didn't begin the way she had imagined. At 30 weeks pregnant, a moment of unexpected bleeding led her to go to the hospital for what she thought would be a simple check-in. Instead, it marked the beginning of a very different path. Sarah's son arrived 8 weeks early, at just 32 weeks. And with that came doubts, uncertainty, loneliness, and a level of anxiety that many parents of premature babies know all too well. She shares how having a baby arrive early reshapes your entrance into motherhood and how you learn to find your footing in a world you never expected to enter. This is a story about vulnerability, resilience, and learning to become a mother in circumstances you can't control. Let's begin. Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Good day today, it's all sunny. Shall we start with some introductions? Who are you?
So my name is Sarah, and I have a 3-year-old boy.
Okay, great.
I think we're here to talk about my experience with motherhood, starting with the premature baby and basically NICU.
Let's go back to the very beginning of your story. And let's go back to the start of your pregnancy.
Yeah, of course. So it was very uneventful. I found out I was pregnant. Everything was wonderful. Had scans, all good. There was nothing alarming at all. I had a couple of extra follow-ups, just because of underlying health conditions, but everything was very bog standard. There was nothing alarming at all. So I had private scans, prior to 12-week scan, just for reassurance, and then I had a couple of extra on the NHS as well, just because my dad has some health issues and my mum does as well. That meant that for me, I was slightly higher risk, but yeah, there was nothing really alarming at all.
Okay. And so they were all happy. So that's the end of the first trimester. Jumping into your second trimester, how did that go? Were you feeling, by the way, first trimester, did you have any sickness or anything? And was the second trimester like, oh, freedom? Or what was it like for you?
So the first trimester, I had a bit of nausea. I felt a bit tired, but it was nothing. I know some people really suffer. I didn't have anything like that. And then when I entered the second trimester, I noticed a slight difference in the nausea. But again, because it wasn't that bad in the first place, it didn't feel like a miracle change that I know some women go through.
Mm. Okay, so you went into your second trimester feeling happy, confident, sort of well within yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. You go to your, what is it, 20 weeks scan? Is it?
Yep.
Yep. How did that one go? Were they happy?
Again, completely uneventful. Every time that they seemed to scan my son, he was in the wrong position. So I had to keep going back for like rescans. But there was never anything eventful or bad that they found, just that he tended to be in the wrong position a lot of the time.
Would they ask you to do a bit of dancing or what was it? Jiggling, or were you given a bit of sugar to get him to move?
Yeah, dancing, sugar, it never worked. So then, like, a couple of days later, I'd go back and miraculously he'd be in the right place. I don't know, he's awkward, I guess.
He started early. He was like, ha ha ha. I will trick them all. The rest of the second trimester, is that uneventful as well?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I had some extra scans again for the aforementioned staff, and they said the only thing that was concerned was that he has a massive head, which, to be fair, he still has to this day, and I think it's just part of him. But that was the only concern, and so they were a bit unsure about a vaginal birth because of that. But other than that, there was nothing bad.
Okay. And at what point did you start to feel that something was unusual?
There was one day, I think it was over like the Easter bank holiday weekend. My husband and myself were trying to clear out the nursery, in preparation for the arrival. I was like 30 weeks, and I'd been feeling a bit rough the days before, but I was like, oh, it's Braxton Hicks. And so put it off. But then suddenly I went to the toilet and I noticed bleeding. I was like, okay, that one I can't ignore. So I called the maternity ward, and they said, yeah, come in just in case. So I did that. And I'd been feeling like pains and things, but honestly, I thought it was just lower back pain and all this other stuff that you get in pregnancy. It's really difficult as a first time to know what is abnormal and what is normal.
And was it because you were so early in your pregnancy still that you sort of brushed it off and thought, it's probably nothing, probably Braxton Hicks, nothing I should really pay attention to?
Yeah, that was pretty much my thought, and also everyone had told me, "Oh, your first baby's gonna be overdue. Prepare yourself, for a long wait," and all of this. So it didn't ever enter my head that he would be early. And then also I'd had a load of experiences with other people that were pregnant that had gone into the maternity ward and felt silly for doing so.
Mhm.
And so I really didn't want to be that person. And I felt really strongly I didn't want to go in unless I felt there was a reason. And then the blood was definitely a reason.
Yeah, that sounds like that's definitely a sign to say something's a bit off, even if it could have been nothing, but you want to have it checked. Okay, so you go to the hospital. How do you live? Do you live with a bag, or do you just live with your file and that's it?
Just my file. I hadn't packed a bag yet. Just me and my husband were like, "Oh, we'll go down with the file." I don't even think my phone had much charge, and I thought, "Oh, I'll be out in a couple of hours, and they'll say that nothing's wrong."
Okay, so you arrive at the hospital. Um, where do you go?
So we go to the maternity triage
Hmm.
bit where there's mostly it's very heavily pregnant women that are probably going to have a baby any moment. And I was there with a relatively small looking bump, just waiting. So yeah, we waited there for quite a while because I don't think I was really considered high priority at that point.
At first, are they asking you any questions, or did they have a record of your call before? Did they know that you had some bleeding?
It was very much, oh, that like the phone call that never makes it through to the people at the desk, and so you have to explain everything again. And immediately they were like, "Oh, you're very early. You need to show me your pad to prove there's bleeding." And so, very uncomfortable thing, but yeah, went to the toilet and did that, and then they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah, valid reason for being here," and then took me back to start some checks. So yeah, they first laid me like on one of those beds and um, hooked me up to one of those things that measured contractions. I don't actually know what they're called, but the band around your stomach
Oh yeah,
with
yeah,
the
yeah.
little white electronic looking thing. And they put me on that and they said, "Oh yeah, you're having fairly regular contractions." And then suddenly a doctor came in shortly after and started an exam.
Could you feel the contractions yourself?
Yes, but I just assumed they were just aches and pains, and I thought they were Braxton Hicks, so I sort of felt them, um, but they didn't feel like what I'd expected them to be from what you see on TV. And again, first time, you just have nothing to go off of.
What do they do? Do they keep you in triage, or do they move you to a different part of the hospital at this point?
So they kept me in triage. They did an exam and they said I was 1 centimeter dilated. They said that wasn't really anything to worry about because some people do dilate a little bit early. They did a fetal fibronectin test, which measures a chemical which tells them how likely it is for basically the amniotic sac to completely detach from the uterus in the next, I think it's the next 2 weeks or something. And they said they wanted me to wait in triage until that had come back. So then I waited for another 2 hours or so on this funny machine that was measuring contractions.
And at that point, your husband is sitting with you or with you in the room?
Yes, he's with me and he's very much thinking, "Oh my gosh, what a waste of time. We could be at home sorting through the nursery." And I was thinking the same, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, at this point, do you understand what is going on, or are you still thinking we're way too early? We've got nothing to do here, sort of thing. Give us a prescription and we'll go home and come back in a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I very much thought, "Oh, this is just a false alarm. They're going to come back, say that the test is fine, just take it easy and rest at home and carry on with the pregnancy." I didn't think of anything else. So the results are that the fetal fibronectin is incredibly high, which suggests that I'm going to go into labor in the next 2 weeks. And if I don't go into labor in the next 2 weeks, then it's very likely that I'll make it full term. So it was very much all or nothing at that stage where we have to monitor you for 2 weeks. And if nothing happens, then you're all good. If something happens, then it's happened, sort of thing.
As a result, you're moving into the hospital. Is that where you're going to be living for the next 2 weeks? Or do you get to go home?
No, they wanted me to come in, and they said because the fetal fibronectin was so high that they honestly would be surprised if I made it to full term at this point, and they wanted to give me steroid injections and some other medication to try and slow the labor down if possible.
Was the steroid for your baby's lungs, or was it purely to slow down the process?
That was to help develop the baby's lungs. Yeah, because at 30 weeks, it's very unlikely they'll be able to breathe on their own. So that if you can get 2 doses of the steroid injection, which I think are 24 hours apart, your baby has like a much better survival rate and just chance of being healthy. Even after all of that, I was so much in denial. I thought, oh, there's like, it's probably not going to happen. They're just being very cautious. And I was grateful for them being cautious. But I think also I was reaching out to friends and family to let them know that I was in hospital and stuff. And they were like, oh, yeah, first time mums are always like this. There's, always worried. It's probably Braxton Hicks. And they were very, very much, maybe unintentionally, but diminishing what was happening. And so that kind of told me that, oh, I'm overreacting essentially, and that I need to chill out a little bit.
Yeah. What about the medical staff? Are they starting to sound worry or look worry?
It was weird. The midwives very much weren't, but every time I spoke to a doctor, they were pressing how well they were kind of suggesting that it was a very scary and serious situation. So I felt a bit confused because I didn't know whose word to take. Um, so yeah, it was a bit of a weird one, but I stayed in denial for a couple of days.
Mm. Okay, so about this couple of days, actually, can you run me through what happens from the point when they say, actually, you're going to stay here because we need to monitor you very closely because your results came much higher than what we expected, to sort of actually what happened next?
Sure. So every day was pretty much like Groundhog Day for the first, I want to say 3 days. So every 2 hours they would do the contraction machine, and my contractions became a lot more irregular. I think because of a medication they gave me. I can't for the life of me remember what that was called. And then they would do a scan every day because also my child was breech, and so there was a big concern that if I did suddenly go into labour, he's breech, he's got a massive head. It's probably something that we need to be a little bit more prepared for because it could cause complications. So they would do a scan every day, but it wasn't one of those fancy scans where you got to see a baby. It was they literally just quickly did one. Oh, his head's still by your ribs. Then let's move on. And then yeah, I would just see a doctor every day, and the NICU team would come around every day and reassure me that they were prepared if something happened. And that's what happened for I think 3 days straight. Every day, the NICU doctor on call would come around and just introduce themselves. They did say they wanted to give me a tour of the NICU, but they felt that I needed to lay down as much as possible, and even getting up to walk around the NICU to look would be dangerous. And so I couldn't go and look, unfortunately, but they kept coming and reassuring me that the baby would be looked after whenever it came, and that they were prepared for me, basically.
Okay, okay. What about hubby? Where was he during that time? Was he back home? Was he staying with you in the hospital? Was he sort of in between?
So he would come and visit me once a day, but unfortunately with his work and everything, he had to still go to work. So he would come and visit me before work, go to work, come and visit me, then go home and sleep. And he would also be bringing me clothes as well because we absolutely were not prepared for this. I wasn't on top of the laundry. So he was trying to sort all of that out as well.
God, good luck to him.
So then suddenly I get up to go to the toilet, and then I realize that on my pad there was a lot of blood, but also a lot of water. And I was confused because it wasn't like in the movies where someone's water breaks and there's like water everywhere. But it was just like enough for me to be like, this seems strange. So I ran and got a midwife, and I was like, has my water's broken? And she was like, yes, definitely. We need to get you to labour immediately. And then I called my husband and I was like, you better come down just in case.
Mm. At this point, how far along are you?
I think I was 31 plus 4.
Okay, so very, very early and definitely within this 2 weeks window that they had given you originally. And husband was in the hospital at that point?
He was at work, and his work were very frustrated with the fact that he had to leave, which is, yeah, wasn't fun, but he still came anyway and sat with me in the labour ward for a while. So my stance was I always want to try and have a vaginal delivery, and I kept harping on about that. They were very much take it as it comes, so it depended on the doctor that was there the day as to whether they were comfortable trying that or wanting to do a C-section. So on that specific day, the doctor I spoke to said he was a specialist in breech births and would be comfortable with trying that. But then the next day, the doctor was not comfortable and was trying to push for a C-section. So it very much depended on who was on call on that day.
And so who was on call on that day when you realized that your water had broken?
That was the very confident doctor. So I felt really good about it. But fortunately, everything then seemed to slow down. The contractions stopped. I was still leaking fluid, but they said it would be okay to keep the baby in a bit longer because he was doing fine and there was enough fluid to sustain him. And so it was like, oh, okay, you can go back to the triage or whatever they call it and just stay there because you're not immediately going to go into labor because I was still only 1 centimeter dilated.
Oh, okay. Wow. So for that whole time, so from the time you arrived at the hospital all the way to this point, in your story, your dilation did not change. So you were 1 centimeter the whole time.
Yes, exactly, which is why I was so surprised when the waters broke because I thought that you have to. I didn't really know what the sequence of events was in terms of do you normally dilate first or what have you. So when it happened, I was sort of again in denial, but that was incredibly scary, and that's when things started to like ramp up a notch. So then you go back to like this weird triagey bit where they keep people that are probably going to give birth soon but aren't immediately giving birth, and it was quite an experience because there were loads of women giving or starting to give birth around me. Some of them saying, "Oh, I can't wait for this baby to come out." And I felt like I was the only one on the ward that was the opposite and was like, "Oh, please stay in a bit longer," because it was such a weird experience. But yeah, that's where I stayed for another 3 days.
3 days. Wow. Okay. So you were in that sort
Yeah.
of in between place for 3 whole days.
Yeah, it was tough, but they said because the waters had broken, because I was at such a risk of infection, I had to stay in. So they're also doing daily blood draws to make sure I didn't have an infection. I think they'd given me some antibiotics as well, just to combat anything that could happen. But yeah, for 3 days I was just laying in the triage, having the contraction machine on me every couple of hours and those scans and everything. It proceeded like before, although I was just leaking a lot of fluid.
Okay. And again, I'm going to go back to your husband because I'm assuming he was your birth partner of choice. What's the situation with him? Because you've mentioned already that at his workplace, they were a bit frustrated that he had to leave in a rush. Did he stay with you the whole time during those 3 days, or did he have again to sort of be in between the hospital, home, work?
Yeah, no, he went back to work and home and everything like that. So it was very much back to normal. And I was very conscious of trying not to put him away from work again if it was a false alarm.
That can't be too comfortable thinking something could happen. I don't really know when, but at the same time, it may not. So I don't really want to call him for no reason. I don't want to be, the girl that called wolf. Um, in a way. Okay, after 3 days of waiting and being surrounded by women who are about to give birth or giving birth, what happens at this point?
So then suddenly the contractions started again and they started to get a lot more regular. And I felt a lot more pain with them compared to how I had the last, like, prior week and a half-ish. And then so they checked me again, they realized I was now 4 centimeters dilated. So I'm not sure what really caused that, but suddenly everything was ramping up a notch. And then so the doctors on call came to me and then we discussed sort of options. So the doctors said they didn't feel entirely comfortable with the breech premature birth. And so I said, right, well, we're not taking any risks. Let's go for a C-section. And I was on like a sort of waiting list for the next like couple of hours for who needed it more. So my life and my son's life weren't in immediate danger, so we were just kind of on standby. But then a couple of emergencies came in, and they were seen first for C-sections, understandably so.
Yeah. So your C-section was it considered an emergency C-section, or was it more on the elective side of things?
6 hours of waiting overall, so not that long, but it was still considered emergency because I think I ended up having it at 3 a.m. or something like that.
Okay. Okay. So you go in. How long did it take to take the baby out?
I mean, my guess is probably half an hour. I don't I remember it, but I have no concept of time at that point. Um, because yeah, everything's just happening around you. You're being injected with various things. You can't feel your legs, and yes, I think it was about half an hour, but I could be wrong. It could have been longer or shorter.
Okay. So that's it. Baby's out. Was that a surprise, by the way, that it was a boy, or did you know he was a boy before?
No, it was a complete surprise. We'd chosen not to find out the sex of the baby. However, there was a midwife the day before that had said, "Oh yeah, he's looking fine,"
Oh,
when she did the
great.
scan. We I think yeah, which we were quite annoyed about, but I tried to pretend that, she must have not realized or she must have got confused. But so we kind of guessed the day before, but up until that point, it was a surprise.
Okay, so it was a half surprise, but still. And yet you had not met him. So that was a big introduction to the world. So welcoming baby boy. Who is in the room? It's you, husband, baby. Who else is in the room? Because you've mentioned that you had spoken to the NICU already before. So was it quite a lot of people?
Yes, there were a lot of people. So we had me, husband, anesthesiologist, and two people doing the C-section, and then there were 4 or 5 doctors from the NICU as well. So he came out, and I didn't even know he'd come out. There was no crying or anything like that, um, and so it was just a lot of quiet for a lot of time. But then someone came over and brought me this weird crumpled up baby that was, like, folded in half from being breached for so long. And I mean, to be honest, when I looked at him, he didn't look that early. He looked kind of fine. And he was just happily, like, sat there. It wasn't like he looked distressed or anything, but he did have to be resuscitated and have various other, like, medical interventions to make
Mhm.
sure that he was okay.
Oh, poor baby. The baby is here. The team is ready. They've been waiting for him for a few days already. They know exactly where to take him. So what happens? Do you have time to do skin to skin, or does he go away in the NICU straight away?
No, we're not allowed to touch him. We were only lucky to see him for maybe 10 seconds.
Okay.
There were very strict instructions. He must be taken away immediately, and we weren't allowed to visit him. Well, my husband wasn't for about 10 hours, and me for, I want to say 20 hours, because I think it was like 11 p.m. that day. But again, the concept of time didn't really exist.
Yeah. So baby goes off to the NICU. Obviously, your husband can't follow him with the instructions that have been given. What happens to you?
So I was taken to the place that I think you go after you have a baby normally. So it's just like this ward. You get the normal toast. I think everyone talks about post birth, and yeah, I was given some antibiotics just in case. I don't think there was anything else at that point. They probably did a couple more blood draws just because of the risk of infection. But yeah, I was just sat there, my husband asleep in the very uncomfortable hospital chair, as they always say. Um, and yeah, we just waited there for a while.
Okay. In terms of preparation at this point, so you've been in the hospital for a couple of weeks, almost. Did you have anything for the baby before you left for the hospital?
Uh, no, I think we had a car seat and we had a high chair and possibly a buggy, but we didn't. My parents had insisted they wanted to buy a crib for him. But every time I told them you need to do that soon, they were like, "Oh, we'll wait till he's here," because they didn't believe he was going to come early. So when he came, I was like, "You really need to order that crib now. Like he's not going to be home for a while, but please can you do that? Otherwise, I'm just going to buy it myself." Um, I didn't really have any clothes or nappies or anything like that because well, my assumption was he was gonna be a big baby anyway, so I didn't wanna buy anything that was newborn or anything that would immediately be redundant in that sense.
Mm. D- does he wear any clothes when he's in the NICU anyways, or is he sort of living in a nappy?
Yeah, it's just a nappy for I think the first week of his life anyway, so it didn't really matter.
Okay. So now baby's in the NICU. We are 20 hours later. You're allowed to go and meet with young man for the first time. How does that feel?
It feels really crazy because they're so covered in wires and monitors, and he had like a CPAP machine, which is a breathing machine on his face, and he had loads of um cannulas in his veins to give him various concoctions, I guess, that he needed. So it was weird. It was like there's a baby there, but I couldn't see his face, and I didn't really know what he looked like. You could maybe see a bit of his back because they make them sleep on the front because that's better for premature babies.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it was like a weird blob in a cage that I didn't really have any like connection to, if you know what I mean, at that point.
And you were not allowed to touch him still?
No, definitely not allowed to touch at that point. Just have a look through this weird glass case.
Okay. What are your first interactions, physical interactions with baby boy?
So I think the next day I was allowed to put my hand in and like stroke his like arm a little bit, but they said I couldn't do it for too long because it might stress him out or tire him out, and they really needed to focus on growing. So I think I went down 2 or 3 times that day and was just like giving him a little stroke, like a pet or something, and then just going back to my room. Because also it was incredibly cramped in there because of the machine, so it wasn't really like you could sit there and be with them because also that it didn't feel like there was much point.
Mm. What is the setup? Can you describe it a little bit for me? Is there only your baby in this room? Are there other babies and therefore other families?
So I think he was in the middle unit, which was incredibly surprising because normally 32 weekers go into like the worst one, as in like the most high dependency, but he didn't need that. So he's in the middle one. And I think there were 4 babies in there and there was 2 babies per nurse.
Okay.
It was quite a small room, like a small bedroom, for example, with 4 babies with massive incubators and 2 nurses just running around
Okay.
24/7.
Okay. So you said that baby had to focus on growing. At what point is the feeding question brought up?
So I don't think they fed him until maybe he was a day old, and that was only 2 or 3 milliliters through a NG tube, which like goes up the nose. Oh no, I think it was a different tube that goes through the mouth. But it was literally 2 or 3 milliliters. So I was in the room with other women and their babies, trying to pump and express colostrum and milk as much as I could. It's incredibly difficult when you don't have a baby with you.
Yeah, and is your body even ready for that? Because your body is probably still thinking, well, we're in our 30, we're not at term with that pregnancy. So is your body even aware that it's meant to start producing milk?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it was because it took about 4 days for any milk to come in. I was just trying and trying, and it did basically nothing until that 4-day mark when I definitely noticed it arrive.
Okay, good. And so at this point, then you can't touch baby. So it's not a case of you're holding baby for breastfeeding, but you are pumping. What is the experience like for you?
So at that point, before we were able to touch him, I was still in the maternity ward or the whatever it's called after you've given birth, and I was just pumping on my own. I had a picture of him with all the wires on him, and they said that might help, but I personally found it didn't because it felt more wire and machine than baby. So I was maybe in there for 2 weeks and 1 day. I was allowed home, I think, a day and a half after my C-section. Well, I was actually encouraged and kind of kicked out, asked if I could stay a bit longer so it was easier to see him, and they said no, that's against policy. So yeah, I was sent home maybe 2 days after he was born, day and a half.
Okay. And so at that point, you start just commuting to the hospital every day.
Yes, exactly.
Were you able to drive?
No, not allowed to drive for 6 weeks after a C-section. So I was lucky my husband had paternity leave, and then we'd done shared parental leave as well. So his leave was extended.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, is there a specific leave if your baby comes early?
Yeah, so back then in 22, there was no rights for parents in that sense. However, now they did pass a law. I think it came into force in the 1st of April 25 that if you do have a baby that's in NICU, you get full paid leave for the amount of time that they're in NICU, and you get it added onto your mat leave or pat leave as well, so you don't lose out for the fact, because it's not really like acclimatizing to family life if you're just going to the hospital and stuff. So I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, yeah, no. I think we're very happy to hear that it's been taken into consideration because, to your point, you're not at all starting your family life. It's not about the sort of cute picture you can have in your mind. You're in a very stressful environment, most likely, just trying to understand what's going on. So you said that baby stayed in the NICU for another 2 weeks and 1 day. What was the general routine during those 2 weeks?
So what we tended to do was my husband would drop me off at the NICU. He would stay for a little bit, but again, it was cramped. So he would go back home, try and prep the nursery, go to the shops and buy some things. And also, I probably should have mentioned shortly after my son was born, before we even met him, we were given a list of things we had to immediately buy for him because the NHS couldn't provide them. And so we had to send out family members to try and get that stuff. So then it was just him trying to continually source these things as well, because when you go to a supermarket, preemie nappies aren't sold as standard. And there were various other things that he had to use specifically as well, which you can't generally find. So he spent a lot of time trying to sort out the house and source all these random bits that he, like, our son needed, but we couldn't really get easily.
Oh, so what sort of things are we talking about, and where did he source that?
So the preemie nappies were required. I think he ended up finding a random Boots somewhere that just had a pack, and then in future he was calling around to try and find them, and I'd found some specific ones on Amazon as well. And then you had to use water wipes, and there was certain types of olive oil that needed for their skin because their skin's really dry and flaky when they're preemie. Um, I think there were some other bits, but I can't remember them. They can't have been that important. But it was just the fact that you've just given birth to a baby you haven't even met, and suddenly you've got a list of expenses and you're just completely clueless at that point.
Yeah. Oh, and what about the feeding then? Sorry, I'm going back to this point because it sounds like it would be very central in baby getting his strength and focusing on his growth.
Yes, so I was waking up in the night trying to pump. I was doing it during the day, although you weren't allowed to pump next to the baby. You had to go to a special room just in case fathers came in. It was a bit of a strange rule because I feel like, fathers should be used to what boobs are meant for at this point. But anyway, yeah, I don't know if it was to do with religion or something like that. But yeah, we weren't allowed to pump in the room. So anytime I wanted to pump, I had to leave my son. And so I'd only do that once during the day when I was at the NICU because I didn't want to leave him. But then when I was at home and before I went and overnight, I would pump as well.
What's it like becoming a mother when you can't actually touch your baby?
It it doesn't feel real because as well when he was born, he looked he looked like healthier than most preemies, but he still didn't look like a normal baby. And so in my head, I was like, this son, like this child is mine, and I love him, but also, is he gonna make it home? And so I sort of guarded myself a little bit too because like none of it was certain. Um, yeah, you didn't feel like a real mum because you couldn't do most of the things. Like the first couple of days, we weren't allowed to change a nappy, and then we were allowed to change a nappy, but then we were allowed to hold him, but only for 20 minutes at a time. And there were just all these rules, so it felt like very much like the child wasn't yours, and you were kind of playing with a doll that you're allowed to play with now and again.
Mm, yeah, very strange experience. 2 weeks later, you go home. What does that feel like? Because all of a sudden, no one else is there. You don't have all of that extra medical environment, the nurses, the doctors, none of that.
It For me, I found it incredibly difficult because at the hospital, every hour they would take his temperature, they would measure his heart rate, his O2 sats, every 2 days they would weigh him. And then suddenly going home where none of that happened, I was like, well, how is that possible? And they'd also told us, try not to go out because he's very susceptible to infections. So try and stay home, try and limit any visitors. And so it felt incredibly isolating, but also as first time parents, you're scared about everything anyway. Um, and so that kind of added a layer of panic to me, I think.
Were you able to find a place, most likely not in a physical way, but maybe online, with a community of parents or mothers that were in a similar position to you?
Um, yes. I joined that app Peanut
Hmm.
and I met a couple of people on there. It was very difficult to find preemie parents just because I don't know if it's because it's less common or because they were too busy looking after their kids to ever download the app. I'm not sure, but I met a couple of people specifically that I connected with, which was really nice. But a lot of the people I spoke to, I just couldn't relate to because they were talking about like sleep and things like that. And at that point, I really didn't care about sleep. I cared about, is my baby gonna grow up and have a normal life and all of these things. So it just felt like everyone else's worries were tiny in comparison to mine.
Mm. And sorry, I didn't even ask, but what made it that you were, or that baby was able to leave the NICU after 2 weeks? Did he have to sort of tick a certain number of boxes? He was able to feed on, not on his own, but was he able to feed more easily? Did he gain weight to a level where they thought he's going to be safe outside of the NICU? What was it that decided he could leave?
So the first one was temperature regulation. So as soon as they can regulate their own temperature, that's like a step forward. So that's the point at which out of the incubator and into an open cot. There were a couple of times where it was like a step back. He went back into the incubator. So it was like a bit of back and forth, but eventually he was in that. And then it was, he can maintain his oxygen, which wasn't really an issue for him anyway, probably thanks to the steroids. So that was okay. And then it was the feeding, which he he didn't really struggle with the feeding, but he struggled with keeping the food down. And so it was quite frustrating in that we would feed him, and then a lot of it would come back up, and so they would say, "Oh, that doesn't count." So it was, but yeah, he had to have 100% of his bottles over a 48-hour period before we could be considered to leave. And then you have to watch loads of training, and you have to do a test stay overnight where they watch you and check that you're capable of looking after him, which I think is mad because that doesn't happen for non-preemie parents. And then you're allowed to go home.
Wow. So hang on. So you kind of went to a parenting school?
Essentially, yeah, it was really weird.
Oh, I didn't realize that was a thing. So, but clearly you graduated. Congrats.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and so you're back home. How often do you have to go and visit the hospital with baby boy?
He was meant to have a checkup at 4 months and then 1 year and then 18 months. And then it was just a normal health visitor. It was very much stereotypical as you would a quote unquote normal baby.
Oh, okay. So you go from having to graduate from parenting school to live the NICU to being back into the standard system for a full-term
Yeah.
baby. Okay, that's surprising. Sorry, I expected something a bit more transitional in between. I didn't think that it was going to jump straight into that. Okay, and you mentioned earlier that it felt quite isolating. How did you know when you could start living a more quote unquote normal life with baby? When you could start going out, start maybe having family and friends coming around?
I think I started feeling comfortable with that around 4 or 5 months. So before that, I very much tried to keep him to himself. Anyone that visited had to take a COVID test. I was like really strict about that, and I had loads on hand. So yeah, we've very much kept him apart from anyone. We made sure everyone hand sanitized their hands. It was we were very strict, but I don't think overly so. I think it was all kind of necessary for how small he was.
Yeah, because let's remember as well, I think you mentioned it briefly earlier, but your son was born in 2022. That's correct? Yes. So that was very much still mm, the end of COVID, but it was still very, very much in our minds at the time.
Yes, so no visitors are allowed in the NICU. So ordinarily pre-COVID, grandparents, aunties, uncles, siblings were allowed to visit, but because of COVID, only parents were allowed to visit. And at all times when we were in the NICU, around the NICU, we were forced to wear a mask as well. So it's a very different sort of situation to a normal NICU. Obviously, very different to what NICU would have been like during the height of the pandemic, but still there were measures in place.
Mm, okay. So 4 or 5 months before you started living a more normal life with baby, what what kept you going during those first 4 months with baby? Because I can imagine how isolating it must have been to be home with your baby, probably worrying quite a lot about his health, about his progress, and probably everything else that was being measured in the hospital before, his temperature, his food intake, how many wet nappies and all that. What kept you going?
I think the first I would say 8 weeks definitely were incredibly difficult because you've got to remember that a baby normally starts smiling at 6 weeks, for example. So for my son, that would have been 14 weeks because he was 8 weeks early. So the first 8 weeks before he became a newborn essentially were really difficult because you didn't really see any development other than he started to eat more. Um, but yeah, just the idea of him, and then when he started to smile and giggle, and then his little personality coming out, you know what it's like. It really motivates you.
Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, so now we are baby's 4 or 5 months old. You start going out. How does that feel? Meeting up with your first other maybe moms, joining your first groups, really jumping into probably what you had imagined normal life was going to look like with a newborn or a baby at this point.
It was really weird. So the catalyst for me going out was, my son was on a special formula for the first 4 months of his life, for example. I think it was about that, and we had to see a nutritionist because if he's on that for too long, it can cause other issues. And she sat me down and was like, "I just want to say you've done an amazing job, and you can treat your baby like a newborn now." And she was just so lovely to me. I was like, "Okay, right, I need to start going out of the house and doing normal things," which is it's just weird that that was a catalyst because I think other people in my life have been saying those things and I just ignored them. Um, but I found going out really strange because again, it just felt like I couldn't relate to a lot of the mums. So some of them would be like, "Oh, what was the birth like?" And I was like, I don't really want to open that can of worms for you because I think our births looked very different. And some women, you'd like talk to them about it and they'd be like, "Oh, like shocks." And, like, to the point of being visibly upset, and then you felt a bit of guilt for, like, "Oh, should I lie about it?" Like, just a bit of a weird thing. Um, so I tried to downplay everything that had happened, but, a lot of the groups I did struggle to mesh with, and there were various things I'd go to and never go to again because I just felt like I couldn't relate to anyone there.
Mm. That makes me sad. That sounds like a tough experience because it's probably the point where you need to, create your little connections, build the village around you, I guess. And it
Yes.
sounds like it was incredibly hard. Now let's jump a little bit forward when baby turns 1. Is he sort of caught up with where he's meant to be? Is he looking and feeling stronger, more resistant?
Sorry. Um, so I think by the time we reached that 4-month mark, you kind of couldn't tell he was ever preemie anymore, but, like, at that point because his weight gain was fantastic and he was just a big baby anyway. But by the time he was 1, I wouldn't say he was fully caught up on his, like, physical milestones. The other stuff was fine, like, I think it's clapping and waving and starting to do those sorts of things, but partly because of prematurity and partly because of his size, he didn't start to do things like crawling or anything like that until quite late. But we weren't concerned.
Is that the point where you are definitely no longer in the care of the hospital?
No, so we had, I think, one more follow-up after that. There was some concerns still, floating about his head, because a lot of preemies have something called, I'm gonna say it wrong, craniosynostosis or something, which basically means their soft spot goes away too early, and they thought he had that, and so we were still under the care to just make sure his head was alright. I don't know why there was such obsession with his head, because it's fine now, but that was the only thing that was sort of outstanding, and I think they also wanted to make sure that he could walk and say some words before they were comfortable fully discharging him.
Okay, okay. And that was to check that he had the right brain development.
I guess so, yeah. They say most or, like, yeah, the majority of preemies will have caught up by the time they're 2 years old, and so they wanted to just make sure that he'd met most of those milestones. So when he went back at 18 months, he was walking, he could say a couple of words, and his weight was perfect, and so they were happy to discharge us.
Fantastic. So now I think we're probably getting to the end of your story. I was wondering, what was your vision of maternity during your pregnancy or maybe even before? And how did it compare, obviously, with the reality of it?
So before, or when I was pregnant or before I was pregnant, I was like, I'm gonna be this. I'm I'm gonna breastfeed. I'm gonna co-sleep. I'm gonna do all these wonderful things that seem ideal for a little baby, and I want to be really attached to this baby and all of just all of those lovely things that you can do with a little person. That was my vision. I mean, you're not allowed to co-sleep with preemies because the risk of SIDS is way higher, and I never breastfed because he latching was too much effort for him. So I would pump, but then after a while I stopped that as well because the mental toll was just too much trying to look after a preemie and then make sure I'm doing that as well. Um, but yeah, I still feel, although those first few days were very difficult and I didn't feel bonded, I'm incredibly attached and bonded now. So I don't think any of that really made a difference.
So now that we are a few years later, and obviously now your little boy is now a big boy, and you've built your relationship together, and you now have the life that you probably always thought that you were going to have with him, with that connection. Looking back, is there anything that you would advise Sarah from the past if you got to somehow time travel and bump into her? What would you say to her?
I think I would have definitely said, like, always advocate for yourself. So my silly worries about, oh, I don't want to bother the doctors. I don't want to go to maternity triage if it's only a small thing. Who cares? Bother everyone as much as you want. Like, go 10 times a day if you feel you need to. Like, the health of your baby is most important. So I'd say, as soon as you start feeling weird, go there. It probably wouldn't have slowed down the labor, but you never know. So always, if you're not sure, go and see a medical professional because it's just not worth the risk. I also just like to reassure her that it's okay, everything's going to be okay. Because in those first few weeks, you're so just worried about even the survival of the child. It just feels so heavy. So just having reassurance that, you know, your child could end up being a boisterous 3-year-old that is massive and loud and insane and hilarious. I just never imagined that when he was that tiny. I didn't think it was even remotely possible. So I'd reassure her of that as well.
Would you tell her, oh, don't worry, you will ask him to be quieter. You will ask him to be a bit more gentle. You will have those times.
Absolutely.
It will happen.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with maybe a mum who's currently in the NICU, sitting in the NICU, or is facing potentially a premature birth?
Um, I would just say ask as many questions as you can and as you want to. Like, no question is a burden. You're not worrying. Like, who cares about other people? You've got to make the most for your kid. And also there are a lot of resources online on Instagram and people you can meet and talk to and things that just kind of validate your experience as well. So look out for them because they help me feel a lot better.
Brilliant. Any that you'd like to share?
Yeah, definitely. There's one in particular, Miracle Moon on Instagram, who's like a NICU therapist who only went into that because she had a NICU baby herself. And watching a lot of her content is very validating just for the emotional part of having a premature baby.
Fantastic. I'll put that in the show notes because I'm sure that could be helpful for some mum somewhere who's wondering what's going on and what she can do. Perfect.
Yes, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. That was very generous of you. Thank you for sharing your story, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Sarah's story reminds us that motherhood doesn't always begin with certainty or celebration. Sometimes it begins with waiting rooms, unanswered questions, and learning to sit with fear you never expected to feel. Becoming a parent to a premature baby can be deeply isolating, and yet Sarah shares it can also reveal a strength you did not know you had. Her experience is a powerful reminder that there is no single way to enter motherhood, and that every beginning, however unexpected, is valid. If any part of her story resonated with you, You'll find more details and resources she mentioned in the show notes. Thank you for listening and for holding space for stories just like this one. Raising with the Village will now be released every other Thursday, giving me the space to keep bringing you thoughtful and honest conversations. You can find all past episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you usually listen. And you can follow the show there, so new episodes land straight into your feed. If you'd like to get in touch, share feedback, or suggest a story, you can find me on Instagram at Raising with the Village. I always love hearing from you. And if this podcast has resonated with you, one of the best ways to support it is by subscribing, rating, leaving a review, or sharing an episode with someone who might need it. It truly makes a difference and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for being part of the Village, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.